We will get started in about 10 minutes. So we know there's lots of people just joining on. We'll be doing kind of a different format today, where we're going to be doing more of a typical we're going to be doing more of a product presentation with all of the new stuff. We'll let people get logged in so we can get started right around 1 p.m. or in about 9 minutes. So let people get logged in. So today's live stream will be kind of a walkthrough of Cubase 14 in detail. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. We usually have time beforehand and for introductions. So if you're watching this live, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, that'd be great. And we'll get started at the top of the hour. So again, today will be a slightly different format. Instead of our usual Q&A, we'll actually be doing just kind of more of a walkthrough, and we'll get back to our normal Q&A sessions starting on Tuesday's live stream. So if you have like specific questions, we'll probably cover that more on Tuesday. All right, wonderful to see Dom Segalis on. It's great to see you on, Dom. Hope you're well. Enjoyed your pictures from Maui. And we'll get started. And again, just at the top of the hour, we're letting people get logged in. So we see Henrik just saying yes, asking if he has time for coffee. So yes. Great. See, Tim Weinheimer has already gotten Cubase 14. If you've gotten Cubase 14, just mention it in the chat. All right, so we have Martin in Germany, just installed Cubase 14. See, Bratman Studios' birthday was yesterday, so happy belated birthday. All right. See, a lot of people have 14 already. See. All right, see, Soren got Cubase 14 and is liking it, so we'll get started in about 5 minutes. See, Paul Gruside is installing Cubase 14 Pro this evening. See, Yash Desai just saying it's a really amazing addition so far. All right, we see Nick is on. So once again, for those people who are just kind of logging in, we're not doing our, usually we do, and if this is the first time you've logged into the Club Cubase stream, we usually do kind of Q&A where people ask questions, and this time we're actually doing a more detailed walkthrough of Cubase 14. There's a lot of new things, and we'll kind of discuss design intentions. We will kind of go back to our normal format starting on Tuesday, November 12th. So if it seems a little different format, that's kind of the intention of today, is kind of walk you through a lot of the new aspects We see from Paul Gruside just saying, is this being recorded as usual so we can replay it and gain knowledge and going forward? So yes. So we see Jazz Dude says early today. So I accidentally hit go live. So we'll get started at the top of the hour, but we'll try to get started at the top of the hour without, but we'll let people do kind of introductions and get logged in beforehand. Okay, wonderful to see John Barry checking in from English Riviera. All right, we see Captain Energy Music checking in from like Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, not too far from me. We see Bishop got Cubase 14 yesterday. Mark R just says hoping for some score editor walkthroughs, so we'll do that. All right, Yash decides says really amazing addition so far. All right. So we see Yao Amen just says, is there any update from 12 Pro to 14 Pro? So yes, you could definitely update. So if you just go to the Steinberg.net and just go to shop, you can see the update pricing from 12 to 14. It'll be localized for your country. All right, so we have Tom Kowalski checking in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Always like going to pianos and stuff there. Great shop with Huey. See, Jazz Dude says Cubase 14 steals all my time. He's modulator addicted. So it can happen. All right, so we'll get started in about 3 minutes. So once again, for those people just logging in, we're not doing kind of our typical format. Our typical format is generally where we will answer questions that people have live. But today we're doing kind of a special Cubase 14 walkthrough, and we'll go back to our typical format this Tuesday. We're going to ask all sorts of questions. So, see, Gareth is saying cheeky Greg and his poker face. So, I didn't want any Germans to, any people at the staff to. I didn't want to disappoint any of the staff in Germany releasing information early. So. All right. All right, so we have people checking in from Saudi Arabia. Bo just updated in Copenhagen. All right. Get started in about 2 minutes. All right, so we have AK checking in from India. Michael Marshall got Cubase 14 Pro yesterday. Seriously groovy, he says. We see Robbie Bowling from Dallas, Texas. We have Barons66 watching from Germany. Okay, we have D. Haukip checking in from Northeast India. Thanks for joining us. Okay, we'll get started in just about a minute. You see Tireman Guitar says, I activated my Cubase 13 after October 9th, yet there's no grace period to 14. Do you know why? Will I get to update for free? So if you activated the license after October 9th, you might see an email, or you might just look in your Steinberg activation manager. Okay. See, TJ Sats says he was the first one to ask for when Cubase 15 is coming out. All right, so let's go ahead and we're We're at the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining for today's live stream. Once again, today's live stream is going to be a different format than usual. So usually what we do in the live streams, if you're not familiar, is we'll just sit here and answer questions for you on any questions that you have on Cubase or Steinberg products. Today we will kind of do a detailed walkthrough of Cubase 14, and this will be kind of a document that people want to see a very detailed walkthrough. So we're not going to do our typical Q&A session today. So just a quick word, just a little heads up with that. So we will go ahead and get started. So Cubase 14 was released November 6th, so on Wednesday of this week. So it adds, hundreds of features, little things here and there, but there's a lot of really exciting things. It's been, I think, a very positive response to the latest version. And one of the things that we'll always see in new versions, something that may not be as apparent, is there's always more optimizations under the hood. So we're already seeing people, mention that they're having much better CPU performance with that. One of the things that we had gotten for years and years, when people would go to their preferences and they had if they go to general and they do the autosave, what would happen a lot of times, the project files would get saved, the backup files would get saved at the same location as the project folder. So if we wanted to look at kind of a typical project folder, you may have lots of just .bak files, .bak. So often you could have up to 10 BAK files in your project. So if we wanted to come over now, one of the things that we could do, just get the right view up here, is when we go to our Finder. So if we go to our typical projects, and I remember being at many composers' facilities, and this was like one of their biggest complaints, because we come over here to documents, and we'll say we look at projects. Just find it here. So when we look at a lot of people's projects, you may notice that there's lots and lots of .bak files littering the same project, and they couldn't distinguish all of their .bak files, the backup files, from their actual saved project file. So now when we do this, we can see that when we go to Cubase 14, there's a brand new folder that's automatically created for the backups or the autosaves, and it's aptly called autosaves. So now you're not going to see all of these .bak files directly in the same project level, the same hierarchy level here in the folders with the actual projects. Now, sometimes when we want to actually create quick events on the project, this has also been enhanced. So let's say we want to just double click on a particular event. So if we have a blank track, whether it's like a MIDI track or a sampler track, the new drum machine, a virtual instrument, now we could just double click and it will automatically create an event. Before, people would have to come over, and if you knew this trick, you could create an event by holding down the Alt or Option key and dragging. But now when you just need to quickly have a container for different types of tracks, you can just come over here, double click, and if you double click between the locators, you could automatically just double click and create events between the left and right locators very easily. So just a really easy way. And when we do a double click, if there's no left and right locator set, by default it'll be one measure, and then you could just extend very easily to the left or right. One of the things that we will see with Cubase also is the ability, when you start Cubase, some people may have a friend that's working in Cubase Elements or Cubase AI. Maybe it's a Cubase Artist or Cubase Pro version. So let's say you needed to hand off a project to your friend and they were running Cubase Elements, but you weren't sure if that project with your plugins was going to actually load into Cubase Elements. So now when you double click, I think if you hold down the Alt or Option key, when you double click, you'll have the option to, with a Cubase Pro license, you could open up Cubase Elements, Cubase Artist, or Cubase Pro. If you have a Cubase Artist license, you could run Cubase Elements or Cubase LE, I think. So you could run all of the different versions of Cubase that are below, that are at your level or below your level. So when working with someone that has a Cubase Elements and you wanted to check, you could just hold down the Alt or Option key and double click, and then actually your Cubase Pro license will then run Cubase Elements and you could see how the actual project will open up. When we go to add tracks, there's a couple of enhancements here. So when we go to add a ruler track, one of the things that always kind of bothered me a little bit was we could add a ruler track, but we couldn't necessarily set the time format as we added the ruler track. So now we can say, okay, I want to add a ruler track, and we could set the time format for seconds. I go to add a ruler track again, and we could choose to do this in time code, and we could also do time code offsets. So we could do time offsets as these ruler tracks are added. When we go to add, let's say, an instrument track, you have also the option to just choose these to be MIDI parts or to go directly into a pattern event. So the pattern event, we'll look at it in a bit more detail, and we'll also see a new track classification where we could add track and we could choose to add a drum track. And we'll get to that in just a little bit later in the presentation. A new element that's been enhanced is what we call the clip gain. Cubase was the first program that really offered clip gain. This goes back to Nuendo 1 in 2000, and it was kind of like a revolutionary thing that we could just drag the volume and adjust the pre-fader volume. So when we want to do this, so the clip gain has moved. So if you're used to coming to the very top center of an event, as we work with that, the clip gain has been relocated to the bottom left-hand corner. A lot of people would accidentally click on the wrong part. And the clip gain, while we could see some of the values when we started doing clip gain changes, which a lot of people didn't use because they were kind of guessing at what the values were, this has been enhanced. So when we go to our clip gain, we see in the bottom left-hand corner, we can now come over and we could see this little volume. When we click here, we could now just open up a little fader and we can make our clip gain adjustments there. If I hold down the Control or Command key and click, we'll immediately go back to 0 dB. So this will allow us to adjust the overall clip gain. If we want to now make adjustments, so people could draw in adjustments before in previous versions, and this goes back to kind of pre-Cubase SX and pre-Nuendo times, kind of a volume level that was like in Cubase VST 3.7, I think it was introduced, called dynamic events. So if we want to do different changes, I can now click here with the pencil tool, and we can now just simply make changes like so. So click here, and we can make our changes that easily. And as we do this, if we look to the right, we can see what the dB value is of the node that we're making adjustments to. We could also make the adjustments here in the info line. So we say this definitely has to be 1 dB louder. We could do that. As we want to put in, let's say, a different node here, and we adjust, we can now just do your Bezier curves. So if you want to make your curves like that, if we want it to, again, we'll put in some additional nodes. We can move these up, down, and make our adjustments as we see fit. If we want to now select a range of events, I could, with the pencil tool, select a range, and now I could just take the clip gain from the top and be able to adjust the clip gain like so. If we wanted to go to the right center edge, we could compress or expand the volume changes. And when we want to tilt, so I want that to go up, or I want the beginning to tilt, we could come here, and then if we hold down we could put in additional points. So very easy to work with. My favorite aspect of the clip gain change is that now we could use the range tool, select a range, and I could just make a clip gain change directly there. So I don't, in previous versions, I would have to split this range. I would select a range, do a key command, which no one could ever remember, to split the range, and then I could make the clip gain adjustments. Now I could just come here and make my clip gain adjustments, and it's very fast, very easy to kind of change all this. Now some people go, what's the difference between this and automation? And I've seen this on a lot of forums and Facebook, social media, where people are like, oh, it seems like we could do all this in the automation. So this comes as the signal before it hits the channel of the mixer. So before we go into our compressors, before we go into our inserts, the channel strip, the EQ, and the automation below is automatically going to be after all of that. So we could adjust the gain beforehand. Now, if you want to see the clip gain constantly on, there is a preference. So if we want to come over and say, okay, we'll go to our preferences, and I think if we go to event display to audio, that you could have it automatically. Let's see if I have this. So I think it's event display audio, that we could have the thought it was in here, but so you could, there is a preference to automatically hide the clip gain, but it will show up when you hover over the particular events, just like that. So it's not always going to be kind of an eyesore. And let's say if we totally had messed up, and as we're putting in our different nodes and we want to start from scratch, we could come right over here to your audio menu and choose to remove all of the event gains. So very easily, if you want to come here, make your adjustments, make a fade out, or just grab one single node, you could do that. So you could treat it very simply. And if you're used to, and for many of us that are working on this, if you're always used to going into the top center, like some people thought we took the feature away, it just migrated here where you could now access it directly with a fader. All right, so let's take a look. There's been some new range editing capability, and this has been enhanced. So let's take a look at some of our range. So I'll just hide this so we can see this a little better. All right, so one of the things that's going to be really obvious with range selection is now when you select a range, the color is inverted. So it's really obvious what part of the event is and has a selected range. And on a previous live stream, someone had asked, is there a way to actually set the range between two locators? And I came up with a macro to do that. It wasn't the easiest macro to make, but now we could just double click between two events, and that will automatically set the range between those two events, like so. Let's say I want to select all of the range. I want to do a range selection on this track until the actual event starts. So if I double click with the range tool to the left of the event, so it will now select the entire range on that track just by double clicking up until the event actually starts. If we are doing and we need to resize the range, I could, let's say I need to extend this range selection, I need to start right there. I could hold down the shift key and just click, and that will extend the start or the end of the range. So again, just come here, shift key, and click where you want the range boundaries to be. All right, now we could also have new behavior. So it used to be that when we would, and we'll just show a preference for this. So when we go to our preferences, we will come over here, and it's going to be under editing, that range tool splits partly selected events. So this is a new preference. So previously, what would happen is if I wanted to select this range and move it, if the event was partly selected, not the entire event, it wouldn't move over. So now we'll go to our preferences or settings, depending on your OS, and we'll say range tool splits partly selected events. So as we do this, I can now take those events and without having to split them in advance, move them just with the range tool. Now another preference that's been added with range is where you see cycle, where we see track selection or range selection follows track selection. So we look directly here. So if I have a range selected and I select a different track, that range automatically moves to the selected track. So very nice and easy. If we want to also come over here and just mute events in the range, so say, okay, I want to take this, I could hit Alt or Option plus M, and we could mute the range, again, without having to split. We could also come over and just say, I want to take this particular event here, we'll make this large and obvious. I'm going to take this range, and as we come over here, I'm going to hold down my Alt and Option, so like Alt, Option plus Control Command, and now I could slip the audio within the selected range without, again, having to split the event. We also will have different times, let's say if we were worried about the phase relationships between our instruments here, I could select one of the tracks, just a portion, just do a range selection right here. Let's go to the audio, and now I could choose to invert the phase of just the selected range. So again, we could just select the range, go to the audio menu, and choose to invert the phase just that easily. Now, when we want to move events that are selected in a range, we could come over. In previous versions, I could select the range, and as I moved like my left and right arrows, we could move kind of the range to different areas in time. But now we could hold down the Control or Command key, and I could now move the selected range. If I move it over top of other events, we could just delete those events. It will do a delete overlaps. So if I want this range to just say, okay, we want to go right there, we could do that very easily. And again, we're just kind of nudging. So if you want to move the range, use the left and right arrows. If you want to move the event that is under the range selection, hold down the Control or Command key plus the left and right arrows. Plus, you could just use the up-down arrows to navigate and select your different range. So a lot of great enhancements with the particular range functionality. There's some other little editing goodies. One of the things that I've been kind of lobbying for a long time is, let's say I have these three events here, because people that are on the live streams, they see me do this all the time where I'll select events. I will come over and I want to quickly turn this into like a new audio file, and we go to bounce selection. And this is a really handy function. but I couldn't really implement it in a lot of macros because we would get this question: do you want to replace the events? And generally when I'm choosing to do a bounce selection, it will automatically, I'm intending to replace the events. So now we could just choose please don't ask again. So now we could replace the events, and the next time if I uncheck, again we come over here to the audio to bounce selection, we can now just choose to please don't ask again, and at that point we could now utilize this function in macros because we couldn't say replace and trigger the replacement within a macro. So one of those things, it just saves mouse clicks. When working with, let's do a little bit of, say we have some offline processing. All right, so let's say we have a file for direct offline processing here. So we listen to our file and we've done a clip gain change here of say minus 13 dB roughly. So we listen to this particular file. All right, so now we have that file, and let's say I want to do a offline process. So I'm going to come over here to my direct offline process, and let's say if we don't have auto apply on, let's say I want to do a flanger on this particular file. So let's come over here and we'll apply the flanger. So if we want to preview this, in previous versions, if we had our gain structure set to minus 13 dB, when we did the preview, it didn't take the gain structure change into effect during the preview. So if you're doing compression or dynamics plugins, you would have to listen to it after, because the preview, as you made your adjustments, wasn't taking the clip gain into account. So now we could preview, and the clip gain is automatically taken into account. So let's come over here and we'll just say auto apply, and now that's automatically been rendered. If we want to go to a dynamics plugin, we'll come over, let's say we want to do black valve. Again, we can, let's say if I'll just remove the auto apply here, we'll remove that. So now when we go to a dynamics plugin, we can have all of the clip gain change, and we can have that and listen to it in the middle of the preview before having to apply, undo, redo, apply, kind of guess, undo, redo. So things like that kind of make things easier to work with. Now, some of the preferences that we've seen, like for range editing, for our clip gains, some of these are attracting users from other programs. So one of the great things that we could do is we go over here to preferences. So if you're people that are migrating from a different program, and instead of having to explain, change these 5 or 6 preferences, and it will give you the same behavior that your muscle memory are used to working with, we could actually just now come over here and load up like a Pro Tools editing preference, so that we don't have to make all those changes. You could just load that up as a preset. So again, making it easier for people to kind of work and migrate over to Cubase. Now we're going to have some new functionality with the media bay. So we'll come over and let's just take a listen. Let's say we have a drum loop going on. So we'll listen. All right. So a lot of us will build songs just based on different beats. So, but now what we want to do is, let's say I have this drum loop and we'll play this loop. So my keyboard is not working here, Hannah. Okay, so we have this drum loop, but let's say I want to audition different loops to go along with that. So I'm going to come over to my media bay. We'll just go to some of our different loops that we like. So I'll say we'll go over to like SQL library. Let's say I want to find like some electric bass sounds here. Okay. Or I'll just find some other loops here. So let's just say we want to, as we're working with this, all right, so let's say we'll do like pop guitar. So we're playing. So now I could, so we could have this automatically play back in sync. So, but we also have other choices where you could say, let's play back at twice the speed, at the normal speed, or half speed. So again, we could have our normal speed, half speed, now we also have what we call like a tape mode. So if we wanted to come here, I could audition this loop and have it do vary speed so that the pitch will change. So like as we're playing here, we could just, so we could change, like just like when we speed up analog or slow down analog tape, we could have that automatically change the pitch and the speed of it. So again, if I just want to come over and double click. Now, as we go to listen to different loops, so let's say I want to come to a bass part here. We'll just find electric bass. And we go to audition. One of the cool things that we could do is we could set up kind of like different, where we could choose to say, okay, we want this to be in musical mode. We could link the playback, but now we're going to have the ability of, we'll just find a different loop here just to, so let's say now I want to find bass part. Just find some audio loops here. But you also will have the ability to automatically have the loops follow the root key, the project root key, as well as follow the transpose track. So now, again, we could just audition different loops and be able to just come over and have all of the different loops automatically play back completely in time without, so that you can do it at half speed, double speed. You could do it with kind of a vary speed tape and have it follow your project root key as well. Now there's also some additional kind of slick MIDI editing functions that have been included as well. So when we look at MIDI, one of the things that, you know, MIDI has often been kind of criticized for a long time is like, oh, it can sound a little sterile, it could be a little generic, and it's often very repetitive. So let's take a listen to like these two parts here. All right, so let's start off with, let's say our bass is maybe too busy. And we look at we listen to the drums. And now we can see that our drums are maybe not, we look at the velocity of our hi-hats. And we can see that the velocity is kind of not so incredibly exciting. So I'm going to come over and I think I made a quick logical editor preset. See if it's still open. I'm just going to select every other hi-hat here. And we have introduced two new concepts. One is a play probability, and the second concept is going to be a velocity variance. So I've selected every other note here, and I could say I want my velocity variance, and we could just say, and I just typed in a value here of like minus 60%. So now when we listen to, we can see that what was like perfect velocity. So let's say we'll have our velocities kind of all be the same roughly. But now I could take like these velocities and I could vary these velocities softer, these velocities louder. So where we could take kind of, if I wanted the hi-hats to not have the same velocity, we could just do this variation. So again, if we undo, let's say I will select all of every other hi-hat. So we'll come right over here to the logical editor and we'll say, okay, let's come select every other hi-hat. And I could, just come over here and we'll see our velocity variation, our velocity variance. I'll set it to minus 40. We see this kind of reflected on the editor. So now every other hi-hat is going to be softer. If we undo that, we hear how it's kind of very sterile. Now you can kind of add a groove. So we look at our velocity. Our velocity hasn't changed, but on playback, it's doing its variation. If I want to apply that change to the velocity, I could right-click here and we say apply the MIDI velocity variance. So now that we go back to look at the velocity, we could see that every other note will have just variable velocities to make it sound more human. So let's take a listen to our bass part. Okay, so we'll come over here and say our bass part. So let's say maybe the bass part's a little too busy and I want to take this bass part and repeat it. But again, I want to do what we call play probability. So I could select particular notes. So let's say, okay, I want to hold down my control or command key and say, okay, I want these notes maybe on. And we will go to play probability. So I'm going to set these to 60%. So now those selected notes. So let's say I'll take this run here and we'll set the play probability to 70%. So now these notes, 70% of the time will play. So these two notes. So now we get these natural variations. I want this note to play 50% of the time. So we could, again, come over here to the play probability. See if it plays now. And we could adjust this graphically here. So let's say this downbeat, maybe I want that to play 40% of the time. And as it goes through, if I copy this part over and over again, it would just have different probabilities of playing so that we're not repeating the same exact MIDI information, that we could have natural variations like a musician would do. So it won't play the same thing 2 times in a row. So you get those really nice natural musical probabilities. One thing that you'll also will notice here is we could set the off velocity in the drum editor, in the key editor, and this used to only be available within the MIDI list editor. Most people couldn't find it, but if you need to set the MIDI off velocity for your instruments, this is now also directly a part in the MIDI and drum editors. One long-standing feature request has been the ability of being able to move events within different parts. So let's say we have a lot of tracks. Here, let me clear my throat. We have a lot of tracks. So we go to our mix console, and and the one thing that people wanted for years was the ability to simply come over here and say, you know what, I have this snare track. Now we could just come right over here and move the snare track directly within the mix console. So we could select it, and we can see where the green line is. We can now move that directly inside of the console. So it seems like a really obvious thing. We finally are able to do this. Now with this, we could also have new MIDI remote functions and new keyboard shortcuts that are associated with this. So when we go to a particular track, one of the things that we'll see is move selected tracks. So if you wonder where move selected tracks to new folder, it's now in this little break off, but we could choose to move it to the previous position, move it to the next available position, or to the top of the project, or to the bottom of the project. And I've assigned these into my MIDI remote. So when I come over here, we can see that I've just mapped these move selected tracks to previous, move it to next. So now with a keyboard shortcut or with utilizing a MIDI remote, I could just take my snare top track here, and I'm going to move it down. I could move it up and freely move tracks. And if I have multiple tracks selected, so let's say, okay, I want to take these 3 tracks, I could move these 3 tracks up or down. I could move, let's say, my snare top, I want to move up. Just come here using the keyboard shortcut, or if I want to move it directly to the top of the project or to the very bottom of the project, we could do that as well. So we could just simply move tracks directly from within the project window, within the mix console, or just using keyboard shortcuts to move them as you see fit. So a nice welcome addition with that. One of the questions I get on live streams a lot is, let's say we have lots of different plugins as inserts on a particular track. So let's say I have, all like 4 or 5 or 16 inserts. Now many people may have like insert 1 for like a controller, and insert 2 is always this plugin on every single track. So now there's new keyboard shortcuts, and I have these mapped in my MIDI remote, but we'll just come over here. And as we do this, we could say, we'll see open close editor for insert 1. So now we have key commands to open up every insert on the selected channel. So now if I just want to come over here with a MIDI remote, I could open up insert 1, 2, 3, 4, just that easily. So now every insert slot, you could have a dedicated keyboard shortcut or a dedicated function just to open up the specific insert slot in particular numbers. So that's a nice welcome addition with that, to be able to always open up. If you have this plugin on insert 1 in every single track, you could hit a keyboard shortcut and open insert 1, insert 9, insert 16 on the selected tracks. All right, now the mix console has also changed a little bit, and we notice that we don't see like the 3 different zones where we have the faders, the inserts, and the sends, because now we have kind of the full mix console directly in the lower zone. Now, one of the changes that's made this unique is that now I could go to chord pads, and when I go to my chord pads, the height of the chord pads could be completely different than the mix console. So now we could just come over here, have separate heights for each of the lower zones. When we want to come over, you may notice that as people are looking and as people are starting up Cubase 14, some people are like, my VST2 plugins don't work. Is there something weird? All right, so you may notice that and I'll show this in a quick picture here. I took it on my Windows machine. But VST2 plugins, if your operating system, your computer supports them, so that would be on a Windows platform, or if you're running on Intel Macs or with Apple Silicon based Macs, if you're running those, you could have your VST2 plugins. VST2 plugins won't run natively on Apple Silicon. So if you all of a sudden need to use a VST2 plugin and you're not seeing it in Cubase 14, it is disabled by default. So you just click here and you could enable VST2 plugins. So again, that will work on the Windows platform, and if you're running Intel or Rosetta on Apple Silicon Macs, if you're running natively, the VST2 plugins don't work. So just be aware that if all of a sudden you opened up and your plugins are missing, just go to your VST plugin manager under your studio menu, and then you can enable your VST2 plugins. But it's always a good idea to try to migrate to VST3 workflows with that. All right, so we're going to have some new plugins that are included. So let's take a look at some of these. And these are again, really great high quality plugins. So let's take a listen to just a little bit. We'll start off with just maybe a guitar part here. Okay, so let's take just like a really basic song. So we'll say, okay, we have guitar, we have vocals, and like a fretless bass. All right, so we listen to these three together. All right, so one of the first plugins is that people have been asking on live streams for is like, wow, does Cubase have a shimmer reverb? All right, so, and if you're not familiar with a shimmer reverb, we'll just go ahead and take a listen to the guitar here, and we'll go to our send. So we'll listen to guitar dry. And now we'll open up the shimmer reverb. So basically what the shimmer reverb will do is you could have kind of pitch correction. So if you want it to be like an octave lower, most people will do the classic shimmer reverb is like an octave higher. So let's go ahead and just listen to just the shimmer reverb by itself. So it's like kind of taking something that was a demo, and now it's, so we say demo, and now it's has a production vibe to it. So you didn't add any instruments, we didn't add any keyboard parts, we didn't have to play anything, we could just turn that on. Now another new plugin that we're going to have is a delay, and this is called the Studio Delay. So we'll open this up. Soured words are now dead and done. So one of the things that we'll see is we could just come over here and we could pick your frequencies that the delay is on. And it's going to be kind of a simple setup. But we want one delay. Do we want two delays that get wider? Do we want it to go left then right? Do we want it to cascade and get thinner? Do we want to go left, left, right, right? Do we want more? So you get a visual indication. But we could also implement other aspects. We could adjust your delay time so that it is in sync with your project. So we could say, okay, I want a dotted quarter delay. So we'll just come over here. So we'll listen to it. So we'll say, okay, I want 7th grade in the school parking lot. Now let's say I want it to get narrower. Yellow coach to ferry us home. Now we could also choose to add in some modulation. So let's say I want to add in like chorusing on the delays.
while you called me to.
So say we'll do a half note delay.
Well, even now I'm so in love with you.
If you want it to just on the
just
delays,
like a long, long time ago.
so we'll just listen to this. So if we want to add just distortion, or if we wanted to add reverb, just on the delays, pitch correction on the delays.
And our first kiss, there was no regret. Right after that Garth Brooks show, you told your daddy and he called my mom, said you
So now we could just,
for any boy that dumb.
and as you just kind of go through a course, we'll have just kind of great
Soured words are now dead.
presets for everything that you'd want. So say we want like a tape echo. So again, think of it not just as one particular plugin. So when we come over here and we solo,
Daughters are married with kids of their own.
so again, we
And I
can
know
just come
your
right over here.
dad's pretty happy now, 'cause what began as our first kiss,
So very simple
it started all of this.
to work with. So again, we listen to that in conjunction with the shimmer, reverb, and the guitar.
The day that we met, it was a long, long time ago.
All right, let's take a look at the bass. So a lot of times, like, you know, you think fretless bass. One of the cool things you can do with fretless bass is actually just put one of the new plugins that we'll see on the bass will be an auto filter. So we'll just come over. So we'll bring the guitar in. And it'll bring the vocal in with its delay.
Oh, I remember the day that we went. Seems like a long, long time ago.
So really nice. Plugins are very useful. They're also just, and you could resize the plugins here. So if you want that to be resized, if you want to come over to the shimmer reverb, I think we could do the same thing. So as we come, and we'll open that up, we can again choose to resize if you want to make it larger, smaller to fit within your workflow. Another plugin that was added was kind of a creative tool. So, and we could use this for like different post productions, but it's kind of a clever filter.
Coach to ferry us home. You looked my way and your heart shone through.
We'll come over here to our mix bus, and it's called Underwater. So if we want to make it sound like it's the apartment next door, the room next door, or make it sound like it's underwater.
Oh, I remember the day that we went.
There's also a new volume plugin, and we'll see this more when we talk about modulators. But if you want to, let's say you just really wanted to get more gain or less gain in the middle, like, you know, I'm going into a compressor. At that point, we could adjust and have a plugin that's specifically just doing volume. So you could use it for gain structure or also for different modulation effects. So just a handy plugin. If you need to add more gain within like your effects chain, you could do that using the volume plugin. Need more gain on the output or to attenuate gain, you could put it on the master fader. Supervision has also been updated. There's some new color schemes. So when we go to the colors, we can now, like, we can see kind of colors based on frequency or intensity. If we wanted to come over to, we have some other color schemes here. So you want to put in the magma.
Oh, I remember the day that
So we see just for this plugin that we can change these color schemes.
And our first kiss, there was.
And a lot of these color schemes are designed to kind of help people that have visual issues. so that they could take advantage of the meterings if you have different forms of color blindness, stuff like that. One complaint that we had for a number of years was in utilizing external connections for effects or for external instruments. So a lot of times what would happen is if we would want to utilize an external effect, we would define the inputs and outputs right here. So we say, okay, we're going out of output 3 into our distressor, and then we're going into input 3 of our audio interface for the distressor. And then that way we could take our audio signal, send it out to an external processor, and bring it back. But a lot of times people may have more external processors and more instruments than they have inputs and outputs for I/O routing capabilities on their audio interface. So if you did this, what you'd have to do in previous versions, if you wanted to use the same physical connections on your audio interface, you would have to set it up. And then when you want to go to, if you needed to use that for an external instrument, you set it up, great. You go to another project, and then it's like, I'm not using the external instrument, I'm using my external effects, and I just, set the patch bay up. I do my physical routing of the hardware. Then you would have to come over, remove the assignment here, go over and reassign. So now we have, so it was kind of the audio ports were exclusively used for a particular connection. Now these audio definitions, these connections can be shared between different devices so that you don't have to, disconnect and reconnect the connections, the software connections for the external processing. So makes it a lot easier to just kind of leave it set, and then you could change it as needed without having to redefine it in the particular, with the particular project. Also, moving on with some of the new interface designs, the control room has also been updated. With version 13, we saw a lot of work with redefining and redesigning the inspector tabs here so that we could right click and set up sections. So you're able to do that. You can pick and choose. We could go to inserts. I want to only see the inserts, like in Cubase 12, it would show you 16 inserts, even if you only used one. So now we could, right click and we could say, okay, I want to only see inserts by names, or we want to see all available slots, or I want to see only used slots. So this type of control has now migrated over to the control room, so we could pick and choose which tabs we want, if we want those to be opened exclusively. We see some graphic redesign with some of the knobs. The functionality is still the same. When we go to inserts, we don't necessarily have to see all of the empty inserts like we saw before. And just by right clicking, we could go to set up sections. So if you don't want to see particular sections in the control room, even if it's routed and active, you could just right click and set up your different sections as you see fit. And as you come over here, you could just still have kind of the same functionality. So the user interface has been updated, and it's more modern design with the control room. One of the big themes and big additions that we're seeing in Cubase is going to be utilizing the drum machine. So we have a lot of people that just want to start making a beat. They don't want to load up a virtual instrument. They don't want to add an instrument track. They don't want to do a MIDI track. They don't necessarily want to look for sound. So we come over here and we could just come right to our drum track. Now, as we showed before, when we come over here, we can say, let's go to add a track. And when we go to add a drum track, we'll get the option, and we showed of a MIDI part or a pattern event. So a lot of people will choose to do a pattern event. So I'm going to just add a drum track here. So we'll call it drums. All right, so we're kind of presented with our interface. We have 16 pads. We can have 8 banks of 16 pads. I could select a pad here. Let's just click a sound. And now I could come over. Let's select an empty pad. So we have drum synthesis options. So I'll come here. Let's put on this pad here maybe a hand clap. Okay, so all right, let's put a hi-hat here. Okay, and if we want to kind of just say, okay, I didn't like that, you could right click and we'll say, okay, let's put a different hi-hat. So you could just kind of just choose your different sounds. So we have our different sounds. Now these are all kind of synthesis sounds. If we want to, easily say, okay, I'm just going to pop over here. We'll jump home. I want to drop a sample in. I'll just come over here to, let's say, my drum one-shots favorite folder, and I could just drop a sample in. Now, when we have kind of our synthesis, we can play and we could adjust. So I could say, I want to adjust the tuning. As we come over here, we could say, okay, I want more click. So if I come, if I don't adjust the tuning accidentally, we could add more of an attack, less of an attack. We could change the color. Let's come over and just change the decay. I want to add distortion. I could adjust the level. So a lot of great sound shaping capabilities. I want to come and just add noise to the snare, and let's make the decay of the snare. I want that to be, so we could adjust kind of, if we want to adjust our tuning, cut off, filters. So a lot of great choices for shaping the sound. If I go to a sample, so as I would play back that, we could now just come over and we could have 4 different sounds that are layered per pad. And once we kind of come over here, we say, okay, I want that pad. Let's look at our pad effects. So we could say, okay, let's add a bit crusher. Let's add distortion to it. Let's add a filter. I want to add an EQ. So I'll come here to the snare and let's say, okay, I just wanted to come over here. Let's add the EQ. So very fast, easy to work with, and really to kind of shape your sounds. And as we do this, there's also a group tab. So once we do this, I can say, okay, I want my kick to be louder, softer. I want my snare to be panned. We could also, we'll see effects. So, when we look at this, we can say, oh, okay, there we could actually look at our delay and our reverb. So we'll say, okay, I just want to, let's go to this particular pad, and I will now go back to our instrument, and I'll just say, let's add a delay. And let's say for my snare, I could select the snare here, and I just want to add, so let's say a delay and a reverb. So we'll just come, and our effects are just right there. And if we wanted to edit the delay and the reverb, just one click, and now we could set our amount of the delay and reverb with sends, plus we have 32 stereo outs. So we could do lots of amazing kind of just drag and drop stuff, but what's great is all the presets that you're going to get. So these will show up. We'll have track presets for drums. So if you want to load presets, if we just go to, we could click directly here. It will load up your presets. If you want to do it from your library, from your media bay on the right hand side, we go to presets, track presets, drum. And so we could see all of our drum presets there. So as we come over, we can say, okay, we have our different drum sounds. So again, we have 128 different pads, and it's always accessible. So again, you don't have to load up an instrument. You have lots of sound shaping capabilities, individual effects on each pad. Again, your group, your delay, your reverb. So, and drag and drop any sample right into the pad. So it's kind of instant gratification. Now, as we work with this, since we added this as a pattern event as opposed to a MIDI event, we can now come over to we click on the editor tab, and now we have kind of a step sequence pattern programmer. So all of the sounds automatically carried over with their labels, so we don't have to worry about that. And let's say I want to come over and I'm just going to, let's find where we, okay, so I'm just going to, we'll just solo this track. So I don't actually have to place anything into the project window. So I'm going to start off here and let's just put in a kick. Let's say I'm like, oh, that's too much effort for me to put in like 4 and a floor there, let's say. All right, so if I was too lazy to do that, what I could do is we could say just generate steps. So I could say generate every 4th step, or generate every 3rd step, or every 2nd step. Now we could also add in different elements with kind of Euclidean nature. So if I just want to extend this over, the more that I move this knob, the more steps will get added for us automatically. All right, so let's say I want to do, let's say I'll just stick with 4 on the floor. And now I wanted to put snare in. So we'll say, okay, we want to do, all right, so just take this, and so I want to put in snare. All right, so I'm going to now just kind of drag and put hi-hats in. Now, one of the things, if I was too lazy to even do that, I could come over, and as we would select, we could put in randomization, and then there's actually kind of different random patterns here, so, and different random functions for different instruments. So you can say, let's put in random hi-hats. And then I just roll the dice again, and we can see that this will randomize the velocity as well. So we could just very easily do that. But let's say I just want to put in my own hi-hats, and we'll adjust our velocities all high here. Now we're going to have different controls here. So let's say I want every other hi-hat to be softer. We could do that. So you hear that just by changing the velocity, you could almost make a groove. But let's say I wanted to put a swing just on the hi-hats, but not on the other sources. So I could just put more swing or offset just on the hi-hats. So we'll go ahead and solo the hi-hats, and let's say I'll put all the velocities up again. Let's do our repeats. So I want to take, I click on the repeats tab here. So we'll just say, I could just place repeats in different areas. And let's come over here and do our play probability. So just like we were showing in the MIDI parts, you know, do the play probability here. So play those like every once in a while. Or let's do our velocity variation. So I want these velocities to vary up. I want these to vary down. So we can have a tremendous amount of control just easily accessing other sources. Now I just want to put in, let's say, some bongos here. But right now we can see that we could have, I have 16 steps, And I could have up to 128 steps with 1,000 patterns. But maybe I want to do something a little more interesting. I want to create some polyrhythm. So I'm going to, instead of 16 steps here, I want this to be 10 steps. So this is just going to repeat in tens, while the rest will repeat in sixteenths. So we can build our polyrhythms. But let's say this, I want this pattern here. Let's grab another conga and let's make this 16 steps. But I want this to play backwards. So now this conga is playing backwards, while the other, this is playing in groups of 10. And let's do something interesting. Let's say let's put a big snare hit here. All right, so I want to go to the velocity for that snare hit. We'll make sure that's up. I'm going to go back to the instrument here. So we see that we have all these different functions and adjustments here, and it looks like it's fixed. But let's go back to the drum machine, and I'm going to come to that where that snare is, and I'm going to make this snare maybe just a little bit louder. So we go to the instrument, and we will say, okay, let's do just a little more level on the snare, and we'll give it a little more noise so it cuts through. And I'm going to take, let's say I want like maybe a reverb just on one hit. Okay, so what I'm going to do is right click on this parameter, and we'll say pattern editor, assign to step automation. So now I go back to the pattern editor, click on the editor tab, and I can say, let's take this snare, and I want to add like reverb just on that snare, but not the other snares. And I could come over to my conga here. Let's go to the drum machine. So we'll say we'll take that sound, and I want to take the tuning of that sound. All right, so I'm going to right click here, and we're going to send that to the pattern editor. So when you select, I can now put in different tuning. So we'll say, so if we solo that, now if I kind of like this pattern as something to start with, I could duplicate it and say, okay, I want different functionality here. I want to add, let's say, another kick. So let's say we put in kind of a kick here, but I want this kick to be in 30-second notes. So now I've kind of divided the grid here, and I could say, now another control that we can do in the drum machine is actually what we call a gate. So I'm going to select this kick, and I can turn on the gate. And as we go back to our editor, I could select that. We select our gate, and now I could make these all shorter. So I could adjust the amount of the gate. So let's say I want to start with a brand new thing. So we saw that we could randomize a lot of different aspects, but there's different random modes that we could also do here. We could have musical randomization. We could choose to have hybrid randomization. We could also choose to have full-on randomization. So I could now just come over here to the top and just come over here, and we could roll the dice, and I could just have a pattern. So if you're ever having a hard time coming up with a beat, just come right over here. And now you could choose to edit that pattern as you see fit. You say, oh, I like that one. Let's add a new pattern. Randomize it. And let's make it kind of the hybrid nature set to the randomization for hybrid. So as we randomize, and if we want to switch it to full random, we may not have like kick drums on 1 and 3, for instance. But we could now, again, just come over and spin the dice. And now we could just have all these great ideas that are just instantly accessible. If I want the whole pattern to play backward or forward, so we can say, okay, let's... So that now as I play my project, I could say, okay, let's just pop over here to pattern 1. So now we could have all these parts. Let's go to pattern 2. Now when I want to get these into my project window, all I have to do now is drag these over, and we will just say, okay, we're going to take this particular pattern, and we could just drag the patterns right into our project window as well. So now we could just come over and we'll just take a look. So let's say if we want to go back, we have patterns. Just show you some here. So as we look at patterns, we can now just double click and we could see patterns. We could drag these patterns right in to our project window. And if we want to edit those, now let's say I want to take that pattern and just duplicate it. I can say, oh, let's start with pattern 1. And now I want pattern 2. So we could just come over and have complete access and change our patterns here on the fly. And if we want to edit this and keep it in the pattern mode, we could do that, or we could just say convert the pattern event to MIDI, and now we could do our traditional key editor or drum editor. So for coming up with incredibly great initial ideas, when we work with the drum machine coupled with the pattern editor, that can be a very powerful combination. But one of the things, and don't think that the pattern editor is going to be strictly for with the new drum machine. The pattern editor could be utilized with any source. So anytime that you want to use it with Groove Agent, you want to use it with Hallian Sonic, Backbone, other third-party instruments, you can just simply utilize the pattern. So it's, again, when you add an instrument track, just choose for it, instead of creating an event of MIDI, choose to do a pattern event. So it makes it very easy to kind of come up with new, fresh ideas. So it's a great approach. And again, this level of integration is really pretty spectacular with that. All right, now one of the big themes that we will see in Cubase, one of the most exciting things, because I had to explain this for people, how to try to do modulation easily. So we're going to have a new concept of working with modulators. All right, and if you're not familiar, once we come over here, what modulators are, modulator is a way of kind of an automated manner of changing parameters in different sounds. So if you wanted like a synth filter or volume to make adjustments, it's very easy to use the modulators to do this. And we're going to have 6 different modulators. And again, this is going to be just a great level of control. So let's say I want to start off with like a drum beat here. All right, so let's say I have like maybe a synth bass part here. So I'm going to go ahead. So we have, like, let's say some different instruments here. All right, so we'll go ahead and let's see what some of the stuff that we could do. So we'll start no modular. So I'm going to take this synth bass part, and let's say this synth bass part isn't like the most interesting. So one of the things I could do is put an envelope. We'll start with an envelope follower. And what an envelope follower can do, I'm going to go, let's say on this track, I loaded up an insert of the volume control. Okay, so now when I come here, this plugin can make the adjustments in the volume. Now what an envelope follower will do is it will actually kind of change the parameters and change the volume, can change the parameter based on an audio input source. So let's say I want to take the drums. We're going to basically set it up as a side chain, and we're going to add our side chain source, and we will come over, we'll take our drums here. So that's our sidechain source. And what I want to do is we see this plus sign. So, and this automatically places it in learn mode. I move the parameter. Now we can see that the dynamics are going to be adjusted. Based on so as we just make our adjustments here, so now the volume from the drums is triggering the volume on that bass part. Now let's come over to a different bass part here. So let's say we have this, maybe not the most interesting bass part. So, and this is going to be in retro log. So I'm going to set up an LFO. And I could come over here to, let's say I want my filter. All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to right click on the cutoff, and we're going to say modulators, add to slot 1 of the LFO. And we could say, we'll see our note here. So say I want this to be and we could adjust kind of the position and also kind of how wide. So if I want this to be faster, and let's say I wanted to add a different modulator here. So let's say, okay, so anytime you just kind of come over here and let's say we have our volume control, and I wanted my volume control to be a different LFO, like a different speed. I could just come and we'll say, let's adjust our volume. Touch the parameter. And we could have different shapes. So we have kind of our LFO going on for that. Now let's say we want to take a look, listen to our pad sound. And our pad sound is maybe not so interesting. So if I want to adjust maybe the volume of the pad, and we could go to what we call just a shaper. And here we could draw in our own envelopes. So let's say I want to do this. I want it to go down in volume. Again, now I click on plus, it's in learn mode. I move that parameter. And I want this to be like maybe 2 measures long. We could go like up to like, I think 16 measures. I've changed, let's say I want this to be every 2 measures. So now we're changing that sound. Let's go to like a channel EQ and change our sound. So we'll open up the channel EQ for this instrument. And let's say, okay, we'll activate the EQ. All right, and I want this. And we could right click and we'll send it to our modulators, or again, just kind of click. Now, another modulator we could have is going to be like a step modulator. So let's say I want to adjust the panning. So I will come over and so as we're working with this, so I will just kind of put in some steps, and we can see that we could have this automatically doing. See how the panning will be changed, and we can make that faster. So if we wanted to, let's say we have another source here, we'll go to like our pluck layer. So we'll listen to this, and we have something called a macro knob. And let's say I want to control multiple parameters with one knob. So we come over here, we can say, we turn on the plugin here, say I want my studio delay. And so I'm going to click on the learn. We'll want the output of the delay. And let's open up the instrument. We have a couple of instruments that are stacked here. I want the delay mix on slot 1. And let's come to this plugin. I want the reverb mix. And we'll go to our delay mix here. So now I can move one knob and all of those parameters. And if I want to now take this and let's assign an LFO to this modulator, so click on learn, move this. We can now just kind of bring those up again and say, okay, I want now this is also integrated in with the, I'll just adjust this down. If we wanted to control this also with the MIDI remote, I could take my one knob. So say I want to take this knob and I want my MIDI remote to automatically control, and we could add a second bank of parameters here. So you can have 8 parameters. But we will come over here, I will right click and we'll say MIDI remote, pick up for MIDI macro knob. I will move a fader, apply the mapping, and now my MIDI remote is automatically controlling up to 8 parameters, just that easily. So again, just level of integration that you can just come over and, not only control multiple parameters, have your different envelopes that you could draw in as well. So if you say, okay, this is what's going to make my song number 1, we could do that. So you can make your own user envelopes. Now, the last modulator that we have is kind of an interesting one, is where we could say, and if you wanted to bypass different modulators, is one called the mod scripter. So as we look at this, there's going to be different presets that you could load up for this. And we could think of this as doing, where you could kind of do scripting and create your own. So let's say I just want to come over here and do maybe like just a randomness. So we have just kind of a random function. So if we're playing back this synth, so we'll open up the instrument. So say I just want to take the fine tuning of this. So I will come right over here. Let's do fine tuning of the oscillator. So this way we could kind of make that particular, just have those kind of like natural kind of random aspects. And if we want to adjust the amount, so we could just have kind of different presets for this, but you will be able to kind of do scripting and create your own modulators as well. So this opens up just tons of creative potential of what you do. And I think once you kind of go down this, like, there's probably going to be a lot of people this weekend, I think, really experimenting with all of the modulators. But you see how this could be coupled with, using the modulators. We could modulate a parameter on the drum machine that's constantly going, or you could do the pattern editor to trigger different effects. All these different functions that you could do between the modulators, the pattern editor, and the new drum machine. And it's really kind of a fresh approach, stuff that we used to do in Cubase way back when in the early days, just kind of brought up so that many more people could have these types of functions. Now, one of the big things that we're going to see also is going to be another theme. Obviously, Steinberg creates a dedicated high-end notation program called Dorico. Dorico's had tremendous success, especially recently. And people are like, okay, when is it going to happen that we could have really high-quality scoring of a scoring level application, a dedicated scoring that's integrated with the sequencer? And people have been asking this since Dorico came out, and with Cubase 14, we finally see it. And what we're seeing is kind of a really sensible approach. We could do a lot of things in the previous score editor with display quantize, but a lot of things had to be manually set up by the user. Now, the intention of when we're working with the score editor here is just to say, okay, it says piano. So when I double click and I look at it in the score editor, wouldn't it be great if now it automatically, did a grand staff, that it automatically did the correct, if I wanted the pedals to be interpreted, that it would automatically do so much of the work so that when you open it up, it just automatically looks like a piano part should look like. And this is also going to have like pretty deep integration. So let me just open up different project here so we could see some of the other great scoring stuff. So a lot of us know that when we want to integrate with the chord track, a lot of us spend a lot of time on the chord track. So let's say I'll take a hot mess project here. And what I want to do, let's say I have a project I need to play bass on. So I could take this audio file, drag it to a chord track. And as we do this, I'm going to create a MIDI event, just a blank MIDI event. And now when I go into the score editor, the chord track is automatically created a lead sheet for me that easily. So I don't have to sit there and spend hours kind of futzing around. I could just take the audio track, drag it to a chord track, and we could do this with MIDI as well, and create a blank staff, create an empty MIDI part, open the score editor, and we could print that out. Now, as we want to work with notation, we'll see that we're going to have two different ways of looking at our notation. So we could look at it kind of in more of an editing approach, or more of how it will look on a printed page. If we wanted to zoom in and out, we could grab the zoom tool. And if you hold down the Control or Command key, we could zoom in. If you want to zoom out, hold down the Alt or Option key. When we want to add notes, we could just simply select our note here. We put it in. We could see our caret. So those of us that are Dorico users, this is very familiar to us. If I want to move a note here, we could now just say, okay, I hold down I could just kind of change notes here. We can say, okay, I'll put in, let's say, we have a quarter note. I set my quantized value here to quarter note. I could hold down Control or Command and move the particular note in intervals based on the quantized value. I could also just hold down my Alt key to change kind of the rhythmic factor of it as well. So if I go left, the rhythm will get longer. If I go to the right, we go from a quarter note to a dotted half to a half to a quarter. And if we hold down the shift key, we could just come over and extend the existing rhythmic values of that. But again, kind of the intention is to take the MIDI information that you've played and interpret that in a really musical, sensible manner. So let's look at when we go to a guitar part here. And this is, I haven't tweaked any of this. It's just a MIDI file. This part from my friend Clay Ostwald, who I was lucky enough to have lunch with yesterday, or grab a coffee with. Now let's look at the guitar part here. We'll look at it. So it automatically takes the tempo in. And you may notice that like I didn't have to enter in staccato. It actually did an analysis of that. So you'll see what was like a lot of the settings, like the staff settings. We'll see the settings over here or from the score menu. So when we go to our settings, we can see our kind of overall layout settings. So more global, how we want time signatures. Do we want really big time signatures, the note spacing? But we also have instrument settings. And here we can see, oh, do we want to have it automatically detect staccato, slurs, pedal lines, grace notes? What is our display quantize? Where do we want the chord symbols? You know, what do we want the name to be? So, and what abbreviation do we want? So we may have the full name for the first staff and then the abbreviations for other staves. So if we just kind of come over here, we can see that this will automatically, and this is without having to do any display quantizing at all, that we see these articulations automatically generated right here. So we can see staccato. We could see the slurs when the musical part makes sense for that to occur. Now let's look at a bass part. Before, a lot of times when you go into bass parts, you would then have to set the clef to bass, set your display quantize. But here, when we look at our bass part, we could just see it automatically. It's in bass clef. Why? Because the track is named bass. If a part is named piano, it's going to show up in a grand staff. And again, we can see the slurs. We could see the articulations for staccato notes. Now let's say, okay, I have a lot of measures at rest here. I could just come over and say, okay, let's come over to bar rests. And we'll say, okay, let's do multi-bar rest. And now the multi-bar rests are automatically created for you. Now my favorite one is, let's say we have a drum part. So we look at our drums, we see our drum editor, right? So typical, now this is assigned to a drum map. Now the drum maps, when we actually look at the drum map setup, we could actually see that the notation has automatically been set up in like the general MIDI drum map, for instance. So now when I look at my drum part, without having to do anything, I just say GM drum map. I could go look at it in my notation, and the drums are automatically notated. Why do we do that? Because it's the right thing to do. So instead of spending so much time before where you had to do this, you just kind of take your drum sequence, assign it to like a GM drum map, and the notation is going to be correct. You know, so we can see when the hi-hat is open. We could see all of these different functions. Now, when we want to come over, we could just say, let's take a look at some other scenarios. So let's say I wanted to do like something like for a brass quintet. So we have different project here. It should be under my recent project. So we'll come right over and say, okay, let's go to, I think I have, so we'll open up this and we say, okay, we have our brass quintet. So if we look at this in our MIDI editor, we could say, okay, I could see all of my parts here. We could choose to see like which parts we're working with. But if I wanted to take a look at this in my score, we could open it up. And just like what we do before is we could pick and choose which instruments that we're looking at. So if I hold down my shift key and say, I just want to see trumpet 1 and trumpet 2. So, or I could just now, if I want to see one instrument, I could say just hold down the shift key, or if you wanted to see trumpet 1, trumpet 2 together. Now, when you're dealing with brass instruments, one of the things that's always fun, we'll just switch this to our kind of edit view, is dealing with orchestral transpositions. So when we go to our score menu, we could choose to look at this in concert pitch. We say, okay, we're in the key of E flat here for this particular piece. So let's say, so we go to trumpet. Let me just look at our trumpet part here. And I don't have to always go into, to leave the program to see exactly kind of what we're working with. But we could say, okay, I'm in the key of E flat, but now when we get to our scores, we could say, let's look at it in transpose. So we go from E flat to B flat. So we could just come right over here and we see that all of the orchestral transpositions can be done, and that's going to be printed out. Or if you want to see it as concert pitch, you could just look at it very easily, just one mouse click, and then you could have all of the orchestral transpositions done for you. Now let's say we wanted to do a common use for people is going to be doing lead sheets. So let's say we want to come over, and there's one I was working on just the other day. So we'll say, okay, we're going to have our lead sheet. Let's look at it. And now we could see all of, everything that's going to be printed out. Here, so we'll go to our page view. We can see our title, and we have different settings. So if we want to, put a key in, we could say, okay, it's going to have 1 sharp. And is this major or minor? What key signatures do we want to have? I want to put in dynamics. So let's say, okay, let's put in mezzo forte on this particular note. So it automatically places the symbol in the right area. If we wanted to put in different articulations, and we also have repeat symbols. So we can see when we look at this, I could have my first, my second ending, my codas, my repeats, my fermatas, all of this just handled directly right here very easily. So all of your different keys, if we want to set between different fonts, we could go to, let me clear my throat. We can now just come right over and we could go to the overall score settings. Here we could enter the title, the lyricist, composer, copyright information, whether we want it to be Bravura, which is a font introduced with Dorico, or Petaluma, which is often used for real books. What text font do you want to use? It's all going to be handled right there very easily. But what you see is just with very little work, having beautiful looking notation. Let's say if we're working on a different project, we will do something, let's say, a little more traditional, and we'll look at this. Now, we could also, if you see signpost here, which could indicate different functions, we could say, okay, I just want to hide the signpost. Now, as we look at this, we can see that we could put in our different lyrics. And so if we want to put lyrics in or chords, we can just come right over here. We go to the text. So if we want to put chords in, we could just, click and put our chords in. So A minor, whatever you want to put in. So your chords, but also lyrics. So when I want to click on a particular line here, so I put in like verse 1 and verse 2, but now if I wanted to put in a third verse, I could just go down and hit my down arrow, and I could just start typing, and as I hit enter, it will just automatically enter in the lyrics for you and make the adjustments. When we go to, let's say, the chorus of a song, here when we do the lyrics, we would just go up. So that if we had multiple verses, the chorus, when we see C, as we type in our text, we'll see the chorus will be kind of italicized and it will be in the center. as well. So all these things that, could be like really problematic if you want to put in, your different bar lines, different playing articulations, tempos. All this is very easy to work with in Dorico or in Cubase. It's almost like working in Dorico. If we want to work with a large project, so let's take a look at this project here. Open this up. Okay, so this is kind of like a large format project. So we'll just get all the samples loaded up here. So we'll look at just our different parts that we see. Okay, let's go full screen to our score editor. And at this point, we can just look at our different components. I could say, okay, let's look at all of my wind parts. So, or let's say, okay, I want to look at all of my brass. I could just select my brass and we can see all the brass parts, or I just want to see what's going on in trumpet 1. So it's very easy to kind of see all of our different parts. Now we could also store layouts. So if I come here, I could select, let's say, all of my winds. So I'll just come here, we'll select all the winds, and we could click on the plus sign, and now we could add layouts. So I've already created ones where we could say, okay, I just want to go to my brass. Okay, I want to come over here to strings. And then we can see that that's going to automatically, so the clefs will automatically work, the key signatures, the time signatures. Now let's look at winds. So just one mouse click and we could immediately go back and forth between our different views. Now the beauty of this is we're not trying to necessarily replace Dorico. Dorico is very specialized and it's an amazing tool. But we want you to have kind of the same experience when you're starting in Cubase so that you don't have to take a project and automatically have that, not work when you go into Dorico and you feel like you're starting over again. So we thought, wow, it'd be super cool if we could now go to your file menu and we'll choose export as a Dorico project. So I'll put on my desktop. We'll call this Spain. All right, so we'll get an idea what it looks like in Cubase. Let's open up Dorico. All right, so we'll say open or import file. All right, go to our desktop. I think that's where we saved it to. So here's our Spain file. We just export it from Cubase. Open it up in Dorico, and it looks surprisingly the same. So again, we don't have to start that whole process. And this has kind of been the desire ever since, Dorico's team had started with Cubase. And people and composers have been waiting for this for a very, very long time, that we don't have to restart everything, that the workflow between Cubase to Dorico makes total sense, and just, it's just, again, the right thing to do so we could utilize all these technologies that are available at Steinberg. So if you need to now start with your project in Cubase, do your work there. You don't have to start all over to do your final orchestration and preparing parts for the musicians for your film soundtrack that you're recording. Everything can be handled with, again, a very logical workflow going from Cubase right over to Dorico. So incredible to have that level of scoring integration, and we're going to see lots of quick development with this going forward. I think with Cubase, so that and this is just version 1 kind of implementation. So you can imagine what's going to be coming in the future. So wonderful to have those types of capabilities inside of Cubase, and again, where you don't have to restart everything every time that you need to start the notation process of it. Now, a couple other things that we'll see inside of Cubase that will make a difference for your overall workflow. One of the things that we wanted to do is to, people, as soon as, we have incredibly fast computers, but as we have fast computers, we always will have new capabilities and people trying to take advantage and plug-in developers that now the computers can do this, we can do more. So we've updated the performance meter. So when we come over here, you could actually see dropouts, and it will give you kind of an indication of like which tracks are causing the dropouts. We could just come over here. It'll give you suggested operations. I haven't got it really to max out, but we could also just come over and, if you needed to adjust your buffer size or your ASIO guard settings, we could do that directly from your performance meter. There's also going to be the video engine has also been enhanced. So if you look at the video engine, we can now have 4K and 8K video support right inside of Cubase. So, and again, better performance, more compatibility with different video formats. So the video enhancements. Now, one of the most exciting things is people for years have always wanted a way to freely interchange with their friends who maybe aren't clever enough to be on Cubase yet. And if you did like some forms of interchange, whether it's a MIDI file, an OMF, AES-31 was supposed to do this, never quite caught on, or AAF, there's all sorts of limitations. So recently there's a new format where for project interchange between different DAWs called a DAW project, so DAW project. So now we could come into Cubase, and I believe it's already supported by Bitwig and PreSonus Studio One. So what you could do is now import and export DAW project files. So this way you could take your MIDI information, your audio VST3 plugin information, and that will translate over so that you could exchange files. So if, and this is great because we've had so many people switch to Cubase from other programs, you can now just simply save your old projects in DAW project format and import them directly into Cubase and not worry about having to pay for a subscription just for project compatibility. So you're not going to be stuck. You could use DAW projects to be able to work with that. We're also going to include Spectral Layers Go version 11 with Cubase. So if you want to do spectral editing as well as remove and unmix vocals from different projects, that's now a component of and comes with your Cubase 14 license. So you get Spectral Layers 11. I think it's the Go version. So we could see, just if we think about all the great stuff that we saw, go back, it's like, okay, let's look at just little things. Okay, I get better performance. I have support for Windows 11 light and dark modes. I have my autosave folder finally. I can have more advanced clip gain functions. I have more comprehensive range editing. I could little things. I could bounce a selection. I could have my direct offline processing. I could have my media bay preview at halftime, double time, and have it synchronized with the project root key. I also have the capability of, within my MIDI, to introduce kind of creative randomness with play probability, velocity, variance, and then, finally being able to easily move tracks in the project window with key commands, to be able to have the full screen mixer in the lower zone and still have different track heights so that we can have that completely independently, to be able to move the mixer tracks within the mixer after all these years, be able to open up inserts, or even you could open FX chains with different keyboard shortcuts. So if we're here, I could say I want to open up an effects chain here on the inserts and just hit a button, and we could just load an effects chain that easily from MIDI keyboard shortcuts or using your MIDI remote. And if you can't find your VST2 plugins, remember they're probably just turned off by default if you're still using them. And we think about the new plugins. So no need to buy a new delay plugin. No need to buy a dedicated shimmer reverb. No need to buy a different filter. Enhancements with supervisions. We've seen like great new functionality of the audio ports with their exclusivity. There's going to be some additional Atmos functionality. So you could use like VST3 plugins in 7.12. There's also Stereo Direct and 7.12 for new monitoring and speaker options. We see the enhancements to the control room. We see the drum machine, just very easy way of starting off and making beats with great content and presets that come with that. And that coupled with the pattern editor. And the pattern editor then going into all of your modulation capabilities with all of your modulators. So very creative types of functions, but again, very easy, very accessible. You don't have to go menu hunting. You don't have to look for particular plugins. They're all just available right here, just in the lower zone. And then we get into the enhancements of the notation engine, integrating what we see from Dorco, that technology, so that your music automatically looks beautiful, so you don't have to do so much time kind of futzing around to get something that looks musical in your DAW. And the ability to take that project and open it directly into Dorco to do the next level of preparing it for the orchestra or the ensemble musicians. And of course, Steinberg is always embracing industry standards by really enhancing the DAW project file format so that users from other applications can just take their projects and open them into Cubase. So you can see all this functionality introduced in Cubase 14. You could check the pricing that's going to be on the for your different country where you reside. So all of that functionality is there. You could watch other videos. Check out Dom Segalis's videos. They're always wonderful. But you could see that Steinberg's going to give you like very core creative things, enhancing the workflows, as well as like incredibly powerful musical things, such as the notation engine. So all of those things in Cubase 14. So when you kind of look at what's going on in Cubase and you can see the pace of development, it's really pretty staggering what they're doing at Steinberg. And I'm just like super proud to represent what they do. And I feel so lucky that I get to share what all of the people that, really spend hours and months designing and making these decisions. There's a lot of people, the planning team, all of the developers work really hard to bring you these capabilities. So with that, we will go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank everyone for checking out the live stream, and we will be back to our normal schedule. We'll have, I'm sure, a lot of Q&As as people are checking out Cubase 14 over the weekend, and we look forward to answering all of your questions and helping you get up to speed with all the new features. So with that, we will go ahead and wrap up, and we'll see everyone back on Tuesday. And again, we do these live streams every Tuesday and Friday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, and we usually go for about 4 hours. So come check those out. They're also available online to watch afterwards, and you have the capability of searching for topics. We've covered over 36,000 topics if you go to cubaseindex.com. So I want to thank everyone for being part of such a wonderful community, and we'll see everyone back on Tuesday. Take care, and we'll see you then. Goodbye.